Hello, everyone. This is Cole from the American Journal of Healthcare Strategy, and I'm joined this evening with a special guest, Ella. Ella, please introduce yourself.
Hi, Cole. Thank you for having me. My name is Ella Balasa, and I'm a person living with a rare chronic lung disease called cystic fibrosis. And I'm also a patient advocate and patient engagement consultant working with the pharmaceutical industry and helping bring the patient voice into drug development.
We're so excited to have you on this evening. The patient voice is such an important part, really the most important part of the healthcare industry as a whole. And so we're really excited to have this informative conversation. I want to go back and start at the beginning of your career, looking at your resume and talking about your degree in biology from VCU. What led you to get that degree, and talk about the job, of course, at the lab at VCU as well. What led you to make those decisions?
So I always had an interest in science growing up. But with my healthcare encounters with the disease that I experienced, that I was born with, I never wanted to pursue medicine because I had was always hospitalized and was always around doctors, and it was sort of a traumatic experience every time. And so with this interest in science, and I turned to more of the environmental side, and then subsequent to graduating started working in an environmental microbiology lab. And so the work that I was doing in that lab had some overlap with public health, and then over and as well as my personal experience, because as someone with cystic fibrosis, this is a disease, not to go into too much detail about it, but it's a disease that causes a buildup of thick mucus in the lungs that attracts bacteria from the air we breathe in, and then causes these persistent lung infections that require extensive antibiotic use to treat the infections. And so the work that we were doing in this lab was actually looking at antibiotic resistance present in environmental areas, so within water systems, and how that can affect the human population if getting in contact with it. And so that's where I really started to find this interest in patient advocacy and patient engagement, where I saw myself as a person that lived with this condition who could, understand science and sort of bridge these gaps between patient communities and then the research and healthcare industry as a whole. And so that was really what started my interest. So initially, I volunteered on a number of advisory boards and panels where I was just giving this patient perspective on like protocol design, on areas and gaps and needs of for patient communities when it came to clinical care within the clinical trial space as well. And that sort of blossomed and grew from that. And I realized how much impact I could have in not only sharing my personal experience with the healthcare community and how that can be beneficial to patients more broadly, but I also wanted to be a voice for patients to serve sort of as an example and pave the way and pave the path for others to, have a better experience of healthcare that they received from the input that I was giving, and also to provide and be a fuel for empowering and self advocacy for patients as well.
That's an incredible motivation and reason for doing that. I want to ask, because of your experience, when it comes to things like, the drug formulations and, the medical terminology and the biology of it, that's beyond my understanding, of course. Is that something that you have an enhanced understanding of because of your education and experience?
Yeah, and having experience obviously in reading a lot of medical publications, journals, and things like that, and also just I think my inquisitive nature for wanting to better my understanding of my condition and of research that was happening or that is happening in the cystic fibrosis space. And so I think I really started to take it upon myself to, yeah, understand these medical and healthcare concepts and terminologies. And actually, so around that same time when I was starting to, voice my perspectives on these panels and things, I was also volunteering with a cystic fibrosis nonprofit group that was creating blogs and articles for the patient audience about upcoming research that was happening, upcoming trials as well that we're actively recruiting. So I was working with small biotech, small pharma at the time, and helping to create these patient facing articles and materials that could help our community better understand research and what was going on.
So that's really kind of, I mean, you're really translating the dense, New England Journal of Medicine or JAMA articles into these, or the white papers, like you said, from these biotech and these pharmaceutical companies into this easily digestible literature. I guess what I'm wondering is what does that look like? Did you have to take any additional education? Did you have to, interface with these other patients at all? How did you know how to translate it or how to simplify it?
I think well, given that I only have an undergrad biology degree, so I'm also not a PhD. I am not an expert, I would say,
Mm.
in medical concepts either, although I might have an elevated, a little bit of a more in depth understanding. I would when I was trying to simplify these terminologies and these ideas, concepts, I would just, if there was things that I really didn't understand myself, then I would make sure that that is something that I very much simplified. And even if there was, a definition of an enzyme or a protein or something, I would, make sure that that's explained, or there's a glossary, right, thinking about how. So basically, if it was something that I was very easy for me to understand, then that's something that maybe, could be explained sort of in a similar wording that was present. But so no, to answer your question, I didn't have any, didn't do any additional training, but just from, in addition to my own, what I thought from the perspective of having the condition, we regularly would connect with the patient community through a social media means where we were having that relationship and dialogue and getting that feedback of, are these impactful? Are you interested in this kind of, in a trial like this, or are you understanding this research, or how do you feel about it? So we were constantly getting that feedback to make sure that it was providing adequate information to people, and that, it was actually creating and having the impact that we expect and want.
I think that's an excellent kind of niche of expertise that you've carved out. And then I noticed in the resume you were at the lab, and then you were, doing a columnist for Bio News Services, and then you had that kind of career break for about a year or so, right? And then you came back and you started, joining all these boards and doing all this writing, and you kind of came back in force per se. What went on during that transition, if you don't mind sharing, and what was that transition like for you?
Yeah, so at the middle of, I guess, early 2019, that time I was struggling with my health quite a bit. I was actually told that I would need a lung transplant because of
Mm.
the decline of my lung function, and really, my health and my lung capacity just not being able to sustain my life and the quality of life that I wanted. And so I went through a process of, doing a lot of testing to get a lung transplant. I wasn't actively listed at the time yet, but I went through that whole process. I had to relocate down to Duke University Hospital. And basically during that time too, I was still trying to, as I mentioned before, doing a lot of these volunteer opportunities and really just trying to still be engaged in the space and still be this active and patient voice. And it was through that process too of being told that I need a lung transplant that I also wanted to share about this to the community and be this voice. And so I started writing about my personal healthcare journey at first, but that also quickly transitioned too into being published in BMJ, like as a patient author, and did a couple of other joint publications with my cystic fibrosis provider as well, and pulmonary therapy journal as well. And so basically, I started to create, almost like storytelling in a way, and wanted to again share my personal journey, but then also have this science perspective to it as well, so that I felt like I was educating people on the condition, on possible difficulties or obstacles or medical encounters that can happen. And so I also wanted to share about specifically within the clinical trial space. This is not to go down a rabbit hole here, but I, as someone with very low lung function, as I said, I was referred to transplant. I was for majority of my adult life had low lung function to the point where I was unable to participate in any investigational drug trials because that was an exclusion criteria. And so as I started to interact with researchers, understand more about clinical trials and how they're run, I started to realize that there were other patients that were in my condition, in my situation, who were excluded from a lot of new drug trials because of exclusion criteria, and specifically in cystic fibrosis is less than 40% lung function. And so I just wanted to share more publicly about this experience and bring awareness to thinking how industry could think about the adaptive design of clinical trials, and creating alternative endpoints. And so that was something that I had published in MedPage Today, and really that was what started putting me in the light, I guess, in a spotlight as this patient perspective and voice who could meaningfully contribute and provide really important perspective to the healthcare industry. And so from that point on, I started, I didn't actually get a transplant. I started a new medication that helped to ease some of my symptoms, and I had some improvement and had more stability in my health. And so that was right at the start of COVID. So throughout that year, I really just started getting into through LinkedIn, through really getting into the patient advocacy, patient engagement professional world with the healthcare industry and the pharmaceutical industry. Started being volunteering my time to speak on panels at conferences, which were most of the time virtual during that time. And so, I was able to easily make these connections and be a part of these without the having to spend my money, my own personal money, since I wasn't employed at the time, to go to these events and kind of get that face to face and understand, for me to understand more too about what patient engagement, how patient engagement works in the pharmaceutical industry, and how I could leverage my voice and be a part of that more holistically. And so now, yeah, I sit on a number of patient advisory boards in addition to the work that I mentioned before, and really help to bring that perspective into creating products and services that best serve patients' needs within the clinical trial space, but then even post-market and just overall, and helping to bridge those gaps and build that relationship between patients and the healthcare industry as a whole.
Because you've had a tremendous growth, you since that, that first kind of time where you started to do the writing and do the advocacy. It's grown very well. You've been very, very successful in it. As you mentioned, not just BMJ, but you've published in, PM360 and Springer, and you've been published multiple times in multiple medical journals and on, Health Union. And so you're very well published. And I know you're speaking at a conference coming up in about 2 weeks, right? In April at the Sepsis Alliance. And I think, right?
That's right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So multiple conference, I'm assuming that now, they're flying you out. You probably don't have to have to pay. So you've established yourself extremely well in this industry, and it's really tremendous. I want to ask, how And what was the decision like to kind of start your own consulting firm? Because that's essentially what you do, right? You also sell your services to pharmaceutical companies. Is there a big need in that area, or is it easy to get clients? What's that been like for you?
Yeah. Well, I will say there is a tremendous need because, as I think the pharmaceutical industry is increasingly realizing the value that, patients have and that how valuable that perspective is in making that relation, improving that relationship with the community that they're targeting and with improving even in recruitment and enrollment in clinical trials as more patients are aware of and keen on participating in trials. And so it's really, I think we're realizing, and it's really a mutually beneficial relationship where
Hmm.
there is value for patients to be, really integral into the drug development pipeline from early inception of research, design and ideas, even before a clinical trial protocol is developed, where, that the pharmaceutical companies can understand what patients' needs are, where there are gaps, where are these burdens that their products or services could help to accommodate and alleviate. And so it's it's certainly been a process. Yeah, it may seem like this happened overnight, and I am, really, really in awe too about how much how many opportunities I've been given and how much my perspective is sought out. And again, very grateful for that. But it's certainly, it has its challenges as well. I mean, I think there are still challenges with industry and other healthcare type companies too, and in understanding how they can integrate patient perspectives into their workflow. I think that it requires a certain level of commitment to making sure that there are teams internally in place that can help to build out the patient engagement presence where they can where it's not just patient it's not just that patient perspectives are being sought out and then it's going into a void. There's no follow through as far as that those perspectives actually being integrated into improving their solutions for patients. So I think that that requires, as I said, this level of planning and strategy beforehand. And I think that that's still, although it's present and happening in a lot of large companies, large pharmaceutical companies, I think that where there is a need and where I see my need, or where I see my services providing value is, in smaller startups and with, biotechs and digital health companies where they're starting, they understand the need for bringing these patient perspectives, but they may not know where to start and how to go about doing that. And, developing like a patient advisory board is something I've worked to do and help to keep the relationship too, because I have such a large network of patient advocates as well that have a variety of lived experiences. And so I can I draw on those connections as well and help to you know bring those perspectives in. So I think that, yeah, to tie into your question, I'd say it's sometimes it is a challenge and sometimes it can be, difficult when companies don't necessarily see my value or see the value that I could potentially provide to their work and they're improving their offerings. But all in all, it's been really amazing, and I think that as a whole, industry is moving towards continuously being more and more patient centric and patient focused, which is amazing.
How early in that process? I just kept thinking, as you were kind of saying that was a thing you mentioned a few times. How early are we supposed to, or is it beneficial to implement, these patient feedback and advice?
I mean, I think it's valuable as early as possible. Even oftentimes, I have been asked to review a clinical trial protocol once it's established, once it's created, and making amendments. Let's say I provide feedback, which I have given that doesn't, it will require amending a protocol, and that requires a financial, that's a financial burden on the part of the company, a time burden as well. And so if there would be collaborative conversations happening much earlier, there wouldn't be that need for significantly amending these protocols, and there could be better outcomes from the get-go. And so that's always what I say is making get have those touch points with communities, with patient communities early, because building that relationship is invaluable. Not only can you provide create a clinical trial that's better suited to a certain population of patients, you're also able to find ways to support that community in other ways, where there are needs for them, whether that is disease awareness or support, or whether that is providing various other resources that can help to then show a community that, hey, this company is really on our side. They're really looking out for us and not just trying to make a profit off of creating a drug
Yep.
for us. And so I think that that's, I'd say as early as
As early
possible.
as possible. One of the questions I have is can this be done? We're thinking about some of these startups early on. Some of them don't want to rely too much on the VC funding. Can it be done early on and for cheap for some of these companies? Is there a way of doing it so it's not extremely expensive? I think that one of the things I worry about as a startup founder is, involving the community. Oh, we have to fly people in and we have to do all this. I've heard that that's some of the concerns. So what does that look like economically?
So, I actually think that there could be, because often, I think that the process looks something like this, where a company, if they have enough funding, or have enough resources to do so, they will employ or work with a patient engagement firm, and the firm will connect to individual patients or to advocacy organizations. But patient engagement firms are not cheap, that's for
Right.
sure. And so if there would be that more direct touch point, right, to patient advocacy organizations directly, where obviously patient advocacy organizations, patient support organizations want the best for their communities, and so they have a network of patients too. And so if there could be potential collaboration at a much more reasonable price, because advocacy organizations want any way to support their community and to help their community. So I think that that is a way to go about doing it, which could serve all stakeholders better. I was recently a part of a CTTI, it's a city, the Clinical Trials Transformation Initiatives working group on engaging stakeholders early in trial design and drug development. And really, some of the ideas was really making those connections earlier with advocacy organizations, with patients directly, so that there isn't all of these hurdles that have to be jumped through first. And even with the FDA, bringing patients to the table, to those conversations early with the FDA, can also help to provide avenues for maybe novel endpoint development, when it comes to inclusion, including patients with less than 40% lung function, or
Hmm.
other typical exclusion criteria. So it's a benefit to all, I think.
Excellent advice for the startups out there, as well as for individuals looking to get into advocacy. And so, is that one of the services I'm assuming that you offer? Is that ability, as you were talking about earlier, to connect? You work with startups to connect to these communities.
Yeah, so I'm really can serve as that often that bridge to patient communities, and just help to build that strategy and think about different ways that those touch points with the communities can be made. Whether that is through creating patient materials, connecting through social media, getting patient perspectives through a focus group, or developing a patient advisory board, or whether or just simply getting that patient input and feedback early to provide companies with this insight, and then to build those relationships as early as possible.
Incredible, Ella. Thank you so much for joining us. Very good insights, and your career is very inspiring. So I hope
Thank
that
you.
everyone enjoys listening to this as much as I enjoyed speaking with you. But I couldn't be more appreciative for your time this evening.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it.